Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for August 25th, 2023. On this episode, let's talk about liberty and explore really what does that mean. And to kick it off, I want to start out with Patrick Henry lamenting what he saw as the fact that many people weren't even looking at liberty as their primary goal, the number one thing that they were striving for. This is in the Virginia Ratifying Convention of 1788. And he said, when the American spirit was in its youth, the language of America was different. Liberty, sir, was then the primary object. And some examples of, I think, what he was kind of referencing, maybe none of these specifically, but these types of takes. Here, first of all, from the great Revolutionary War hero and patriot Dr. Joseph Warren in June of 1774, vigilance, activity, and patience are necessary at this time. But the mistress we court is liberty, and it is better to die than not to obtain her. This is a much longer version of the more famous "Give me liberty or give me death." That was a very common view. The goal was liberty, even if it meant sacrificing yourself or risking sacrificing yourself to try to achieve it. Here's John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, said, "Liberty is essential to the happiness of a society. You cannot be happy unless you are free." And I'm going to get to that from Dickinson in a few minutes as well. Liberty is essential to the happiness of a society, and therefore is our right. And here from Mercy Otis Warren, every domestic enjoyment depends on the unimpaired possession of civil and religious liberty. So every domestic enjoyment. So you cannot be happy without being free. So the question, of course, to many, I think, is what do we mean when we talk about liberty? Because, I know when we're in an echo chamber, it's all pretty much the same. But there are a lot of people with a lot of different takes on this, and it's actually not something that's new. This is not something that's come up recently, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But what got me thinking about doing this quick take for this Fast Friday episode was a comment we got on YouTube this week that talks about liberty in a way that I find absolutely absurd. I do not agree with it whatsoever, but certainly this is not the only definition that people have for liberty. I just wanted to share it with you. To me, and I'm actually very grateful for this comment because it, helped me think about something for today. To me, liberty is the freedom to participate equally in defining the parameters of socially acceptable behavior within a community. The only absolute right is that of equal participation in defining what constitutes appropriate behavior. Now, I reject this, but there were many people at the founding generation and much further back that this was actually a pretty good definition, probably maybe not as specific on socially acceptable behavior, but basically a community coming together, making rules, and as long as everyone can participate equally and have equal say, then that's a definition of liberty. To me, it certainly is not, but it's not unusual to see a lot of different takes on this one word. And here from Montesquieu, the founders during the ratification period, they referred to him as the celebrated Montesquieu. He's cited so often during the ratification debates. And here from chapter 2 of his great work, different significations of the word liberty. That's the title of the chapter. And I'm going to link to this and all the other source documents in the show notes. Actually, Alan Mosley is putting together blog posts for these episodes these days. And so that'll be published in the next few hours after the live stream is done here this morning over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. And that's where you're going to find all the episodes. On this particular one, you'll find a blog post where there's a show link section, so you can be like, dude, where is that citation? You mentioned this quote. Where do I find it? You will find it there, along with all the other platforms we're on as well. Anyways, Montesquieu. There is no word that admits of more various significations and has made more different impressions on the human mind than that of liberty. And he gives a couple of examples of how people have defined it over the years. Some of them are kind of absurd. One's pretty funny that I want to share in just a moment. He said, some have taken it for a facility of deposing a person on whom they had conferred a tyrannical authority. That's pretty funny in and of itself. Okay, liberty means you can give someone complete power, but you can get rid of them. So you can at least just get rid of them. That's all that matters. And then you're free. Others, the power of choosing a superior whom they are obliged to obey. In other words, just having the ability to choose your leaders. People like Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson considered this an elective despotism. Just because you get to choose new leaders every period of time, every however long, 2, 4, 50 years, it doesn't matter. That's not what they defined as freedom. That's not how they described liberty. But other people did throughout history. Just literally being able to choose who rules over you is how people have defined liberty. Others, Montesquieu writes, for the right of bearing arms and of thereby enable for the right of bearing arms and of being thereby enabled to use violence. Of course, we think of government as having a monopoly on violence, but if the people themselves have the ability to use violence to protect their life, liberty, and property, then certainly it's no longer a monopoly on that violence as well. Others, he writes, in fine, for the privilege of being governed by a native of their own country, or by their own laws. So this is more of a collective view. As long as a group of people, an independent sovereign state, it could be large, it could be small, it could be millions of people, it could be hundreds, it could be dozens. As long as they can make their own laws and you have equal representation in doing that or equal say in it, then that's liberty. And that's kind of a similar take to what our commenter had to say. That's another example. And this one I thought was pretty funny as well. A certain nation, he writes, for a long time thought liberty consisted in the privilege of wearing a long beard. I had to look that one up, but he was referencing Russia on that one. So Montesquieu points out in 1748 that for ages, people have defined liberty in so many different ways. And he gives them some absurd examples, some more realistic ones. But here's Algernon Sidney, someone who wasn't as influential on ratification of the Constitution, but was very influential on the American Revolution, the radical change in the views of the people from 1760 through 1775, before the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. And here from his great work, Discourses Concerning Government, which Thomas Jefferson called the greatest, probably the best introductory book on the principles of government ever written in any language. So, I mean, you don't need a better recommendation. That's the best 5-star review you could probably get. Here's how he put it. Liberty solely consists in an independency upon the will of another. So just being able to make your own free choices without having to rely on another person. That's an interesting take. That's not how I've ever viewed it, but it really got me thinking. And that a lot of people talk about how, the more self-reliant you are, the more free you are in practice. And I think it really ties in with this kind of a view here, whether intentional or not. But it really got me thinking deeply on that one as well. Liberty solely consists in an independency upon the will of another. And he has a similar take here in section 17. Again, this will be linked to in the show notes so you can read it in context. Sidney's not an easy read, but there's some great takes in there as well. Exemption from the dominion of another, which we call liberty, is the gift of God and nature. So you have it by the nature of your birth. It's not liberty if it comes with a government approval stamp or a government permission slip. It literally is from your own humanity. Jumping back to the ratification debates. Well, this is before they decided to have a ratification debate in South Carolina. They were prepping for it. Here's James Lincoln discussing this. He asked the question, what is liberty? And the answer for him, the power of governing yourselves. Now, I have some confirmation bias on this, and every time I've ever read this before today, before yesterday when I was prepping the show, every time I've ever read this quote from James Lincoln, I'm like, heck yeah, of course. The power of each person to govern themselves individually. And that's how I read it. That's how I take it. But I honestly don't think that's how James Lincoln was referring to it, mentioning it. I think he was more talking about it as the people of the sovereign state of South Carolina being able to govern themselves. That's very similar to that one take that Montesquieu was giving. As long as the people had the privilege of being governed by their own laws. It's more of a collective take on liberty. I got to jump back to where I was here. So the power of governing yourselves. I'm going to keep reading this as individual liberty rather than kind of a collective group thing. So we can do that. Now back to John Dickinson, again, penman of the American Revolution. This is in letter 12 of his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. These were the most widely read documents on American liberty up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I know if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, you've heard me say that exact phrase a zillion times. I don't even have to think about it. It just plops out of my mouth. But the fact is that his views were widely accepted. When Thomas Jefferson talked about what he was trying to do with the Declaration of Independence, he said we weren't coming up with new ideas. We were coming up with an expression of the American mind. He was trying to not come up with new things that were never thought before, but what the American people generally viewed things as. And Dickinson was incredibly influential on that thought. And here's how he put it. Let these truths be indelibly impressed on our minds, that we cannot be happy without being free. And I think that's so important. Again, freedom is the basis for all of our happiness. Again, John Dickinson in letter 12 from his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania said, "Let these truths be indelibly impressed on our minds, that we cannot be happy without being free, that we cannot be free without being secure in our property, that we cannot be secure in our property if, without our consent, others may, as by right, take it away." So it's tying together freedom, happiness, and property rights and consent. And there's so much to unpack there. Now, I would think that Dickinson is primarily referencing the ability to choose your representatives, and without representatives, then you're not giving consent. But we can actually have our own take on that as well. I know I certainly do. But it certainly is that interesting foundational approach of tying property rights as well. And Fisher Ames had a similar take, not as detailed. Here, some years later, in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention of 1788, he said, "As to liberty, how can I be said to enjoy that which another may take from me when he pleases?" Again, about your property, what you've earned, what you've worked for, what you've struggled for. And if someone can just take it and you haven't given them consent, you're no longer free. You have no liberty whatsoever. He said the liberty of one depends not so much on the removal of all restraint from him as on the due restraint upon the liberty of others. So they cannot, it's kind of getting to the non-aggression principle precursors here, because what really is freedom is I don't want to give it away here, but I'm going to kind of sum up what my view is closest to with a take from Thomas Jefferson at the end of the episode here. Here's St. George Tucker in his view of the Constitution of the United States. He said, "It is the due restraint and not the moderation of rulers that constitutes a state of liberty." A lot of people will say, "Oh, we live in the land of the free. Bolden, you're able to do this show and talk to us and spew all this propaganda, this crazy take on the 10th Amendment, blah, blah, blah. And you're claiming that you're not free." Well, St. George Tucker had a really great take on this. Just because government is not actively at this moment stopping you from doing something that you want to do, or that you should be free to do by your nature, through your natural rights, just because government happens to have due restraint at that time, whether it's because they have a person power problem, they have a capacity problem, or they just don't want to be bothered with it, they've got too much on their hands, just because they just don't happen to be violating your rights at that moment, but still claim the power to do so, you're not free. You're only in a state basically of luck. So it is the due restraint and not the moderation of rulers that constitutes a state of liberty. So that would be my way of saying we absolutely do not live in a land of the free, even if some people got in power and just didn't use all that power that was there to violate everyone's rights 24/7, 365, because as long as the power remains, we are still in a situation where we're relying on the rulers to do the right thing. And of course, as Patrick Henry told us in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, anytime any society has ever done that throughout history, they eventually lose their liberty. Well, ours is already lost. So if we got some kind of semblance of freedom back, it wouldn't ever be truly a state of liberty unless government was so restricted that as soon as it tried to get out of a line, it would be shoved right back into its box. Here's John Adams in a letter to John Taylor of Caroline in April of 1814. He said, this is an interesting take, but I wanted to share it. "Liberty, according to my metaphysics, is an intellectual quality, an attribute that belongs not to fate nor chance. Neither possesses it, neither is capable of it. There is nothing moral or immoral in the idea of it. The definition of it is a self-determining power in an intellectual agent. It implies thought and choice and power." So liberty to John Adams is to be able to think, to choose, and to act. He said it can elect between objects indifferent in point of morality, neither morally good nor morally evil. It's not the easiest read, but I thought that was an interesting take as well. This is, I think, having all these different examples shows us that there's a wide range of views on what means liberty at the time of the founding and during the American Revolution as well. Here from the anti-federalist writer Federal Farmer in essay number 6, or letter number 6. Liberty in its genuine sense is security to enjoy the effects of our honest industry and labors in a free and mild government, and personal security from all illegal restraints. Now that's getting closer to my take. We're ramping up to the Thomas Jefferson view, which I think is the closest. Again, it's basically you own your own stuff, you get to work, you don't get bothered, and he references having a free and mild government in that situation as well. But here's, I think, the best take. Thomas Jefferson in a letter to Isaac H. Tiffany in April of 1819. He said, liberty, then, I would say that in the whole plenitude of its extent is unobstructed action according to our will. But, and I think this is a really interesting qualifier, but rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. This is very much a non-aggression principle. You are free to do what you choose to do as long as what you do does not violate the person, property, etc., the liberty of another person. So again, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will within the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. Jefferson continued, and this is a nice punch from Thomas Jefferson, I do not add within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of an individual. So he's really focusing on individual liberty in that statement there. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it made you think as much as it made me think putting this together. I'm very grateful for that comment that was left because you made me think a ton on this one, and I really enjoyed sharing this information with you today. If you want to help us get this kind of stuff out to more people, absolutely nothing helps us do this work more every single day, more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Throw some of that dirty government fiat our way. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you learned something. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.